was having coffee a couple of days ago with a gentleman. In the course of our conversation, I asked him if he had any familiarity with the Churches of Christ. He said that he didn't really, but that just a few days before, he'd been on an airplane, and there was a young lady sitting next to him, and he got into a conversation with her, and that was his understanding of who we are. It was just that brief conversation with that lady. I said, well, what perception did you get? He said, it seemed to me, based on everything that she said, that her relationship with God was based primarily on fear. I said, what do you mean? Well, she told me, for example, that if she had willingly missed a Sunday morning service and somehow were to die, that God would send her straight to hell for that one era, that she would not go to heaven. And as we talked more about the religion, that's what it seemed to be, that it was all about fear. Fear, in and of itself, is not a bad thing. As a matter of fact, it's built into us. God built it into human beings because we need to feel fear on certain occasions. If you were camping in the desert and you heard some noise outside your tent, well, let's make it in Alaska, where they have 4 bears for every human. If you were in Alaska and you heard something sniffing around outside your tent, if you said there's nothing to be afraid of and felt no fear at all and rolled back over and went to sleep, it could be that you would wind up being dinner for a bear. On the other hand, if you heard that sniffing and it alerted you, like something's going on out there, this could be a creature that could hurt me, then what would happen is what's known as the fight or flight response. The fear would kick in because you realize that danger is right there at hand, and you're going to do one of two things. You're either going to fight that, either offensively or defensively. I'm going to put up some kind of a struggle because I don't want to be hurt by this danger, or you're going to flee, which is that you're just going to turn and run for all that you're worth and hope that you can outrun the bear. Several years ago, Alice and I were actually in Washington State with my brother Greg and his wife Ellen. We had gone up into this national forest, and we stopped at the ranger station to get our little permits and et cetera. They said, oh, by the way, at a particular place up here, some cougars have been spotted. So when you go into that area, be very careful. And whatever you do, if you see the cougar, don't run, because it will trigger the predator response, and it will chase you down, and it'll eat you. So we got up there, and we were walking along, and we started making a plan. They said, what should we do if we see the cougar? And I turned to my sister, my brother's wife, my sister-in-law, and I said, I think what should happen is we'll stand and fight the cougar while you run for help. She hit me with a snowball right in the face. It was not a pleasant experience at all. So fear, in and of itself, is not a bad thing. It says there's some imminent danger, therefore I should respond to the danger. When people talk about the fight or the flight, I will either try to fight or I will try to get away. There's a third F that goes with it, by the way, and it's called freeze, which means that you can be so overwhelmed by the fear that you do nothing. In other words, you just shut down. You're too afraid to move. You can't go anywhere. The danger is so imminent that you cannot respond at all. So, does the Bible talk about fear? As a matter of fact, it does. Does the Bible say we should fear God? We know that that's true both in the Old and New Testament. It says that the fear of God's the beginning of wisdom, it's the beginning of knowledge. We understand that. But does it mean then we should walk around and having this sense of danger that somehow we're going to alienate or aggravate God to the point that God's going to destroy us? That's not what the Bible teaches. I want to show you a passage in Revelation chapter 21. We'll start in verse 1. Revelation chapter 21. We'll put that up on the screen here. This is the NIV. Now, you understand that as John writes Revelation, that it's greatly filled with symbolism. And if we were teaching about Revelation, I would explain why it was so important that it was written in symbolism, but that's not our point for today. As he talks about it, he's mostly talking about things that are going to be happening pretty soon. The first part of Revelation is talking about things in history that would happen shortly after John actually wrote it. But as it gets over toward the end of Revelation, he's talking about things that will come in the future. And he says this, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. Just to make sure you understand that, the sea here has to do with the symbolism going on in the book of Revelation. The new heaven and the new earth, replacing the first heaven and the first earth, is not taught just in the book of Revelation. It's taught throughout the New Testament. I don't have time to explain that here, but what I would like to do, Lord willing, and it doesn't contradict some already laid out plans I'm not aware of, is starting the Sunday after Easter. I want to do a series on the new heaven and the new earth. What does that mean? What is heaven really going to be like? And what does it mean when it says it'll be a new heaven and a new earth? I'll give you a little preview now. I am convinced that the Bible teaches that it's not going to be way off up there somewhere, but there's going to be a restoring of the earth, and that we will actually be living in our new invulnerable bodies on this planet. You say, well, why would you want to do that starting the Sunday after Easter? So we can announce it on Easter as well. So when you bring all your friends for Easter, maybe we can entice them to come back for a few weeks and look at the new heaven. But we're not talking about that so much today. The next verse, verse 2 says, I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, now, the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. By the way, that's where that old song, No Tears in Heaven, came from this verse. We somehow got a wrong concept that there would never be any tears in heaven. If you look at it, he doesn't say that. He actually says there will be tears in heaven. He says that God will wipe every tear from their eyes. We can talk about that later. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things is passed away. He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. He said to me, it's done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To him who is thirsty, I will give to drink without cost from the spring of the water of life. He who overcomes will inherit all this, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. And before we read verse 8, stay with me so far. Have you seen that he's describing this wonderful place where that God himself will actually be there? God will be in this place. I'll be with them. Everything will be made new. It's going to be wonderful. And so you have this wonderful living water that God makes available to us without cost, meaning we don't have to give anything for it. Therefore, an implication about God's grace and mercy and those kinds of things. And as he describes this beautiful, tremendous place, and that last verse there, verse 7, he who overcomes will inherit all this. And so we read that and go, boy, there's good news. I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be great. But even as he finishes that, he's going to tell us about some people who will not inherit that. And that's what he says in verse 8. But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, their place will be in the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. The first death means the death that occurs when we leave this body. And the people he's describing here, and this is not an exhaustive list. He's not saying that these are the only people who will not make it to heaven. These are representative of the kinds of people that will make it to heaven. And the second death is that they then will be destroyed there. But look what he says. He says, but the cowardly. That's the NIV. If you had the King James Version, it says, but the fearful. It actually is from a word that means fear. And look, he puts those two things together. The cowardly, the unbelieving. The fearful, and the unbelieving. I think there's a reason that those two words are found side by side with each other, because one is actually the opposite of the other. The more faith you have, the less fear you have. The more fear you have, the less faith you have. You see, when a person has a faith relationship with God, like I believe in you, I put my trust in you, then we understand that we will never be good enough to inherit any of these things on our own. That the living water that's given to us is given without cost. It means that I can't pay for it. I can't be good enough to get to heaven. I can't be good enough to earn all those things God's going to offer. And if I have a faith relationship with God, then it develops into a love relationship with God. And when I love God, then the fear subsides. It changes in every sense of the word. That's why in the first letter he wrote, John, 1 John we call it, John said there is no fear in love. But perfect love, actually it's the word here that means mature. Mature love casts out fear. Now in context, when John says it in 1 John, he's talking about the judgment day. And as he talks about the judgment day, what does he say? He says there's no fear of the judgment day if you love God. That if you love God and you understand that God loves you, then that mature love casts out the fear. Have you ever met someone that just intimidated you the first time you were around them? I mean, he or she was such a strong personality, or maybe they were just famous or something. And when you first got around that person, you thought, I'm a little bit afraid of you. I don't know why, but you intimidate me. If you ever get to know that person, and develop any kind of relationship that has any kind of love in it, after a while others might be afraid of that person, you would not be afraid of that person at all. That's what he's talking about. That there's the fear of God. You know that I am powerful. You know that I can do anything. And you know there is a second death. Therefore, I understand that you should fear me. But when you come to me in this relationship, when we have this faith relationship that grows into a love relationship, then no longer are you afraid of me. Actually, people who live in fear live immobilized. And there are many, many Christian people who do. They live in such fear of God that they can't do anything. And maybe it's not even the fight or flight. Maybe it's more freeze. They just shut down and do nothing at all. And so if you read, for example, through the Gospel of Matthew, you'll find contrasts between fear and faith throughout the book, where there's some story of great faith will occur, and then there's a story of fear that comes right behind it. And Jesus is letting them know, if you trust me, if you have faith in me, then that faith will lead you to believe that I can and I will. For example, one of the stories in the Gospel of Matthew is in chapter 9 about these two blind men. Jesus passed by them. They cried out to him, "Have mercy on us, O Son of David." They wanted him to work a miracle. Now, you must understand that faith, there's a difference in faith and something that you know to be true because of fact. And let's see, I'm not saying that very well. Faith means I don't have absolute proof. If I have absolute proof, it's a fact. Now, I see this thing right. Did anybody else see this? Am I imagining, or is this here? If I say we have some kind of a plexiglass pulpit up here, you say, do you have faith that it's there? No, I can see it. So I can operate by faith or operate by sight. I operate by sight. I see it. It's there. It requires no faith. But if I were to tell you there was something here that you couldn't see, and you're trying your best to see it, and I say, no, believe me, trust me, it's really there, then your belief, your faith as to whether or not it's there depends totally on whether you think I tell the truth or not. If you can't see it, but you believe I'm a truthful person, then you would say, okay, I can't see it, but I have faith that Joe tells the truth. That's where it's there. So this is sight. That's faith. We walk by faith and not by sight. That's what the Hebrew writer would say. Now, as we go through this, then, these men have never, if you follow the point, they're blind men. They're blind men. Therefore, they have never seen Jesus heal anybody. Would you agree? I mean, that's just simple logic, right? Blind men have never seen Jesus heal anybody. But apparently, they have heard other people talk about the fact that he could do it. And so when they cry out, have mercy on us, they're believing that he can and will do something. By the way, they pursue him when he ignores them. And this is an interesting thing that he says to them. Do you really want to get well? Do you really want to see? Now imagine that conversation. If you were having it with God, you're praying for something. You're praying for somebody to be cured of cancer, or praying for some blind person to receive his or her sight. And if Jesus were to look you in the eye and say, do you really believe I can do this? What's going to happen is there's going to be a crisis inside of you. The first is, well, I want to believe because I believe God is all powerful and can do anything. I want to operate by faith. But then there's going to be a fear. The fear is that I'm going to put my faith in you and I'm going to be let down. I'm going to trust you and it's not going to happen because so many times I place my faith in people or things and it didn't turn out like I expected it to be. Therefore, I have a fear that you are not telling me the truth. I have a fear that even if you can do it, you won't do it for me. And so there's a fear factor involved there, no doubt. So what would you say? Do you really believe I can do this? If you just ask God to heal your child of cancer, and if God said, do you really believe I can do this? I think you would have that crisis inside of you of faith and fear tied together, and you're going to find out which one is stronger. Now, I know what you're going to say. We say the right things even if we don't believe it. So what you're going to say is, sure, God, I believe. Kind of interesting how we'll do that. Christians will do that and then cross their fingers, which is superstition, or knock on wood. I don't have any there. I have plenty here. I'll knock on wood. I'm going to do something else to kind of back this up. No, but do you really, truly believe that I can do it? Yes, but. And then the fear shuts us down. I think that's why in Revelation 21:8 he says, but the fearful and unbelieving. Because fear erodes faith, just as faith overcomes fear. Now, you can see this in different parts of the world, in different parts of our lives, actually. Alice and I have 3 daughters. Our oldest daughter, Angel, is mentally handicapped. Her IQ is 57, or at least that's what it was when they checked it many, many years ago. Angel doesn't come to church much every once in a while because crowds really frighten Angel. As she gets older, she develops more fears. I don't know about you, but I've discovered as I get older, I develop more fears. Anybody else have that problem? I used to could run, and now I'm thinking I'll fall down if I run. So I've got more and more fears. One of the fears that Angel developed in the last several years is she's developed this tremendously strong fear of falling. It's just an extremely strong fear. As a matter of fact, in 2006, we sold the home we lived in because the bedrooms were on the second floor. And her fear of falling is so intensely strong that she quit walking up and down stairs, even hanging onto the handrail. And the only way she could go up and down stairs is to sit on her bottom and scoot up the stairs or scoot down the stairs, and in great terror she's going to fall. So for that and a couple of other reasons, but that was the primary reason, we decided to sell that home and find a home where the bedrooms are all on one floor. So we bought an old farmhouse down close to Thompson Station to do that. You say, well, that did away with the fear of falling. No. Now she just walks from her bedroom into the dining room. She's afraid she's going to fall, and she has gathered all of these heavy blankets that she can possibly carry. In her mind, understand, she's mentally handicapped, but in her mind, I think it's if I fall, I'll fall on these, and I won't get hurt. Of course, we look at that logically going, you're going to trip on those things and fall. You tell her that, do you think she responds by saying, what was I thinking? That makes all the sense in the world to me. I think I'll throw these things down. How do you think she responds? Because we tell her all the time, those are going to make you trip and fall. Does she put them down? No, because logic's not going to work when it comes in contrast with fear. Whether you have a normal IQ, a high IQ, or a low IQ, logic is not going to overcome fear. And she wants to carry those things then everywhere she goes. So if Angel were here today, and she were sitting there, we have just this many steps, just this far. It's not very far at all. I've fallen out of pulpits much taller than this one. 3 times I have fallen out of pulpits. Quick story. The first time was Winchester, Tennessee. Never, ever preached in a town named after a gun. I was preaching in Winchester, Tennessee. They had a thing built out kind of like this, but it wasn't nearly this wide. And it was almost 6 feet off the floor. And I was making a point about separation from God. And I said, what happens when you stand with God? You have everything. But do you know what happens when you walk away from... Boom. I hit hard. Nobody in the building got up to help me. The only movement in the building were people just kind of raising up in their seats to see a little better. The song leader was sitting right there. He was looking at me like, huh? I finally got back up, got into the pulpit. By the way, I had a tremendous bruise on my hip that I had to explain to Alice when I got home. I got that preaching. I was at the back door shaking hands like they take you to do in Preaching 101, and people were coming out, and everybody had some kind of a comment. The little old ladies were saying, we're so glad you're all right. We thought you'd had a heart attack. And there was one guy, the last guy, he was the last guy to come out. He just kept circling and waiting. When you see one guy circling, you know you're in trouble. He finally comes out. He grabbed my hand. He said, that is one fantastic illustration on separation from God. He said, you really get your point across. And then he got really serious. He said, but if you do that every place, you're going to kill yourself. All right, so I've fallen out of pulpits higher than this one. This is not very high at all. Even with my bum knee, I could probably take it if I fell off this or jumped off this. But if Angel were sitting right there, and I say, come up here with me, she wouldn't come. Why? Because her fear would shut her down. I'll fall if I try to come up there. You say, oh, okay, and then you need to have something that would entice her that's stronger than her fear. So if I held a crisp, brand new $100 bill, and I said, Angel, I'll give you $100 if you come up here, is she going to come? And the answer is no, because first of all, money has no significance to her whatsoever. It doesn't make sense to her. It could be $100, $100,000, $100 million. She wouldn't get up. You understand? But I said, come up here. Daddy wants you here now. Now she's going to have a conflict inside of herself. The conflict is going to be like this. I want to please my father by doing what he tells me to do because I love him. There's also some fear that I'm going to make my father mad. He's going to be angry with me if I don't do what he told me to do. So now she's got this conflict. I want to please him, but I also don't want him to have wrath toward me. And all of that's going to be against her fear. If I come up there, I'm going to fall. So what do you think she would do? Now, you don't know Angel, but just picture a person in her situation. What do you think she would do? Is she going to fight? Well, there's not really anything to fight here, is there? Is she going to flee? Is she going to get up and go out and leave the room? That's a possibility, but it's not likely. She's going to freeze. She's just going to shut down right there and go into this tremendous emotional turmoil and not do anything other than sit there, and her fear will get stronger and stronger, and then eventually it'll overwhelm her and she'll begin to cry, but she will never come up here because the fear is too strong. You say, so what's your point? I think too many of us as Christians operate just like that. In Matthew chapter 10, when Jesus was sending out his disciples, you may remember the story. He told them, he said, don't take any money with you. Don't even take any extra clothes. Don't take a bag. You're going to live off whatever you come upon. People are going to invite you to their homes. They're going to feed you, etc. You got to trust me. Therefore, you're taking nothing with you in advance. Nothing at all. Just you. If somebody takes you into their home, I'm going to bless that home. If they refuse to have you into their home, I'm going to make sure that that home has some bad things happen because of that. And when you go out there and you're going to be preaching about me, I'm paraphrasing a whole chapter here. He said, when you're preaching about me, basically what he said was this. You think they were tough on the prophets. Go back sometime and read the book of Jeremiah and see how badly they treated him in the Old Testament. I read that book again just the other day. It's terrifying to see what they did to him. You think they were bad on the prophets. You think they have treated me badly. As a matter of fact, he specifically mentioned one of the insults they had made about him. He was definitely working miracles, and the people who wanted to deny that he was of God couldn't deny he was working miracles because they were too obvious. They were really happening. So rather than saying those are tricks, they said, yes, they really are miracles, but he's doing the miracles by the power of Satan, not by the power of God. Jesus, by the way, told those people they would never be forgiven for that. And so now he says to these people that he's sending out, he says, if they say, I'm from Beelzebub, what do you think they're going to say about you? And then he said, fathers are going to turn against their sons, brothers against each other, entire families all will go against each other. And he starts telling them all these things are going to happen as people reject them when they stand up to preach about Jesus as being the Messiah, the Son of God. These people aren't going to want to hear it. It's going to change everything about them, and therefore they're going to reject you and say all these bad things to you, and some of you will actually physically be harmed. As a matter of fact, later some of them would actually be murdered. And this is what he says to them. Don't be afraid. Now, I'm thinking, this is not the way we do things in 2014. If I'm going to tell you not to be afraid, I'm not going to tell you all the bad things are going to happen to you before I send you out there.